Today's standard violin evolutionized from European folk instruments most likely from Italy, Eastern Europe, and Russia. Later, the Amati family reduced the size of the violin, making it more convenient to handle. The nomadic peoples, the Gypsies and the Jews, found it an easy travel companion. This smaller instrument was ultimately the launch of the modern violin. Antonio Stradivari was an apprentice in Niccolò Amati's workshop in Cremona, Italy, and took the traditions of the smaller violin from the Amati methods and experimented and combined them with his own. Stradivari stands among the most extraordinary of luthiers, or craftsmen of stringed instruments, to have ever lived. In the year of 1644, he was born in Bergamo, Italy. Continually making violins throughout his life, producing over 1,000 instruments, which 600 are with us today, he is now best known to have standardized the modern violin. The greater portion of his life devoted to making violins is divided into 4 approximate periods. The Amati period, lasting from 1666 to 1690, was a time when Stradivari's violins still bore many qualities of the Amati's. But during this time, he began his independence of thought trek. He decided on a much flatter model and gave the instrument more belly room for more tonal power. The golden period lasted for the next 20 years. This period was the peak of his craft. At 56 years old, his instruments were more consistent and refined than ever. The period of decline became apparent with his age. The instruments were less refined and often held inscriptions indicating the violin was made by his sons under only his direction. The Stradivari Society of Chicago was created under Stradivari's name to give the opportunity to musicians to play fine old Italian instruments, such as the Strads, that have become off the chart in prices, nearly unaffordable. The Stradivari Society of Chicago was founded in 1985 by Geoffrey Fouché and Mary Galvin. It was requested by Dorothy DeLay. DeLay was a pedagogue of the Juilliard School and thought her talented young student should have an exceptional instrument to help launch her soloing career. By audition, she won the opportunity to have the violin on a generous loan by the Society's patrons. The program expanded and was formalized in 1989. The Society has become so valuable to the classical music world, creating such an extraordinary experience for promising musicians. Soon after the Society took off, violin makers scrambled to create instruments of the same quality but for much cheaper to attain the same level of instruments, but for a much larger number of musicians. Up until the late 1900s, there wasn't much thorough study or experimentation done on the Stradivarius violins. The question was continuously arising: why does a Stradivarius have such a sweet sound? And how can we make violins of the same quality? The mystery was strongly thought to be held in the varnish he used or the density of the wood.
All kinds of ingredients have been debated. There's been talk of fossil amber or propolis, which is produced by bees. We haven't found any of these ingredients which may have given the impression of something mysterious or rare.
After 4 years of study by 12 French and German experts and involving a raft of high-tech laboratories and experiments, the case is finally closed. Stradivari used 2 layers of varnish made of oil and conifer resin mixed with red pigments to give the instruments colour. Ingredients widely used by Italian artists of the time. Simple ingredients perhaps, but scientists admit they're no closer to revealing the reasons behind Stradivarius's unique sound.
Another theory behind the reasoning of the sound of a Stradivari was a dramatic drop in temperatures in Europe between 1645 and 1715. This may have stunted tree growth, creating a more dense wood with narrower growth rings, possibly giving the violin its superior tone. Because there was little evidence to support any of these theories, violin makers today took the research a step further. Joseph Curtin relied on newer technologies, experimentation, and an incredible amount of innovation, and made his way to creating violins that sound unidentifiable next to a Stradivarius.
This is some equipment I've been using to measure the sound radiation of violins. There's a little hammer here, and it taps the bridge of the violin, and that excites all the instrument's resonances, and we can see the frequency response of the instruments.
I think that everyone would agree that the level of new instruments has gone up a lot in the past, let's say, 30 years, partly because there's just been so many new people coming into the field, and partly because you can make a living at it where you couldn't before. You had to do repairs. How closely do they approximate the old instruments? I mean, the standard belief is that, you know, the old Italians sound better and are preferred. We actually did an experiment, myself and a team of scientists from Paris, at the Indianapolis International Violin Competition. Basically, we had 21 violinists. They were effectively blindfolded, so they didn't know what instruments they're trying. In comparing 3 good new instruments with 2 Strads and a Guarneri del Gesù, the most preferred instrument was a new instrument. The least preferred was a Strad, and they couldn't really tell whether they were playing an old or new instrument at all. That's actually the first really scientifically controlled study of what players actually prefer versus what they're told to prefer. The empirical difference between new and old is by no means clear. I think more studies are already in the works, and I think a lot of people will take a fresh look at what's really an effective musical tool.
Stradivari set an incredibly high standard for the violin, and that is why the world of violin making is at the soaring level it is at today. Makers continue to experiment and research in an attempt to reach past the quality of a Strad.
I think there's a lot more that can be tried, so I like to think that 20 years from now we'll be able to offer musicians some significant advantages over any old instrument.
A commemoration tablet is left on his house reading, "Here stands the house in which Antonio Stradivari brought the violin to its highest perfection and left to Cremona an imperishable name as master of his craft."